Hey, good afternoon, everybody. I see we have folks joining us now. We're going to keep letting some folks jump on here, give everybody just a couple more minutes before we get into the heavy content. Thanks for joining us, and we're pretty excited to be a part of this with everybody. You know, with these challenging times we're all dealing with, we'll just start, first of all, everybody is in it. You know, we're thinking about where the market is and what's happening and why we're home. But let's pause for just a second and think about the things that we do have to be grateful for right now. We got some challenges ahead. We all know that. You know, all of our thoughts and prayers are going out to a lot of different big people right now around the world. And this is a great example. I'm looking at our attendance list right now, and we've got people coming in from all around the world to join us today. And it's so exciting to see the audio community joining virtually. Thanks for doing that. We're excited to do this. We honestly, it's been kind of a fire hose week. We're just jumping in here, so bear with us as we move from behind the camera to in front of the camera. Used to being behind the console. Now we're behind the console and in front of the camera all at the same time. Obviously, you can see on the screen here, Pete's with us and Mac. We're just picking up topics. We're picking up things as fast as we can. The whole idea here is that we're not going to try to teach anybody how to use an item perfectly. What we want to do is spark discussion, spark thought. Have you go back to the manufacturer's websites. If you look at our website, practicalshowtech.com and practicalshow.tech, you can see our links. We're putting them up as quickly as we can get them. Thank you, Harlan, for all the hard work you're doing on that end. We're going to try and piece together the manufacturer and the user and try to find that information and the knowledge. You'll notice on your app that's on your app screen, on the phone, however you're logging in. Sorry to be looking off screen here, but I'm going to go over here and kind of focus on my control panel for a second. You're going to see two different windows. There's a questions window that you can arrow down and type your questions in there. There's also a chat window. Feel free to use the chat window to send messages around, whether to us, whether to other viewers that you might know that are on this webinar. The format today is going to be pretty fluid because we're those kind of guys. We're going to be talking about audio specifically for web streaming. We are going to probably branch out because we love to talk about audio in a lot of directions because this is a pretty broad topic. It's not just audio. It touches IT. It touches video. So please, as we're going along, if you got a question, we're watching the windows here. We'll try and throw those questions in as we go. You'll notice on the invitation, we left a 2-hour block for this. We'll take as many questions as we can. We'll interact as best we can. You'll notice when you logged in that it logs you in silently. If we have some time at the end, we will go and try and take some live questions, maybe if we get that lucky. But right now, please type in your questions, get them in the queue as we go along. If we're talking about something and we're moving on too quickly away from something that's of interest to people, just let us know, and we can easily do this. It's rather new for all of us to get to this point where we are the show. And you guys are the show. Obviously, you don't have a microphone there necessarily open to the rest of the crowd, but we're wanting to hear back on that, and to let you know on our future broadcasts that we'll have manufacturers on Monday. We'll talk a little more at the end of today's webcast, but on Monday will be Ram and Jonathan from ClearCom giving us some best practices across HelixNet and FreeSpeak 2 and LQ and Agent IC, their virtual comm software. So here, great example of where we're going to try and connect up the manufacturers. Today is probably less about manufacturers and just more about ideation, about how do we go about doing things? What's the workflow? What are some resources and things like that? So I'm going to drop in here before we start the topic because we got most everybody on board. I'm going to go into a little more detail. You can obviously see on the website at practicalshowtech.com the bios, but top of the screen is Pete, green-haired Erskine, and you know, most of you know Pete from Facebook, from all his different postings on Best Audio. He is the quintessential open source. He is the human Linux, right? He believes in idea sharing, knowledge sharing, and in the world we're in right now, we got no place else to go. So let's share ideas. Let's share concepts and knowledge. The phrase that I'd like you to remember is there's knowledge learned and knowledge earned. We're in the knowledge learning phase of this. So we're gonna share. Other people are gonna share throughout the next weeks. The industry professionals. I'm a host. There are people that are way smarter than I am, and what we want to do is pull that knowledge out, and we want to share that, and then take that out in the field, because guess what? At some point, we're going to emerge from this. We're going to be doing shows again. We're going to be doing broadcasts. We're going to be doing what we were doing up till about a week ago. And we're going to take this opportunity, though, to dig in deep, get the manufacturers. They are anxious to share this information. I was on the phone yesterday with a few of them, and every one of them can't wait to be on with Pete. And then Mac, we got Mac Kerr. He's I assumed that Pete was at the top of the screen because he was on my viewer, but Mac's on with us. He's based out of New York. Most of you know him from ProSound Web as a moderator there. You also know him as a coworker, somebody who's been in the field with us for many years. I'm not going to commit to how old everybody is in each of these photos, but needless to say, we all know how to use a reel-to-reel machine. So that said, you know, Mac, we're in a, yeah, it looks like we got most of our attendees on here. I think we'll kind of launch in with you. I'm going to start just talking about web streaming. Mac's in the field as a mixer, right? And today, Pete's going to be both our comms professional as well as our PowerPoint operator. So we're just going to kind of flow along here and all those kind of things. So let's break down webcasting into like two pieces, right? We have what we're doing today. Streaming is this ubiquitous word we hear, right? I'm going to do a web stream. I'm going to do a webcast. You know, if we all had a nickel for everybody that wanted to do a webcast last week, right? So we have these, what I consider to be a very simple webcast. It's a fixed platform. You sign on. You have the built-in camera.
Kelly, can I interrupt? A couple of people have said they don't know where the chat window or the question window is on their screen. Can you describe that again?
I can, yeah. So folks, look for your go to webinar control panel. And in that question, I see some questions here. Kevin McKnight, will this record session be available for download at a later date? Yes, it will, Kevin. Thanks for that. This is a good question. We're going to be sharing all of these with that.
The question window is a little question mark on
correct. It's a little
on the right-hand side.
And they should have in their window that. Let's see here. Thanks, guys, for and ladies for going along with us here. We're all learning that. So again, look for the window that's question or the question icon. Right, should be able to drive you to that. All right.
Yeah, it's on the right-hand side. There's a star, a snowflake, a microphone, a waving hand, and below that is a question mark. So click on check the question mark to ask your questions. Now, in our rehearsals before this, we thought that attendees could not turn on their mics and talk to us. I do note that some, but not all of the attendees do have available mic lines. And I don't know what the distinction is with that. For instance, Jamie Weiner and Aries Fernandez and Joseph Hopkins and Leonard Frazier, and forgive me if I'm mispronouncing your names, have mics that we can turn on, but not everybody. So I'd love you to text to us in the chat, in the question window, how you actually logged on so we can figure out what versions of this software actually can do that. We'd love to have you all have your mics available. Kelly?
Excellent point, Pete. That's great. Good point there. Like you said, we're moving to a different part in the workflow than we're typically accustomed to on shows. So we've done more rehearsals for this, I think, than I did for most of the shows that I worked on last week or 2 weeks ago. Yeah, I see here, Trenton, you ask about the chat window. Depending on whether you're running on the phone or whether you're running on your laptop, there may be a different icon for that, or a arrow down component in there. I'm going to flip a note out here. Hi, this is the chat window. Amazingly enough, I've discovered in the last 3 days how little audio is required to communicate. I don't know that that's great news for me as an audio mixer, but actually it is quite exciting, because later on we're going to talk about all these other tools that are available that will help us do our jobs better, more efficiently, or if anything, help us stay connected. So when things aren't working so well, we can deal with those. So again, like Pete said, please contact us, whether it's here, whether it's through the website. What app are you using? You know, are you on a phone? Are you on an iPad? Are you on your laptop? So we can figure out how to make each of these better, and continue with that. Like we were talking just a minute here ago, is the webcast. What is a webcast? Well, GoToWebinar is a webcast. WebEx is a webcast. These are all platforms that originated out of the conference industry. Years and years ago, the only way you could conference was with a phone bridge. Years ago, we had Pictel, which was the early ISDN video, right? I was 128K we might, if somebody really had big bandwidth, we might even be able to double or even triple that resolution, right? But this is all an evolution, and here we are today. We're doing web streaming. We happen to be using this platform. It's probably one of the most efficient. It's something that we can easily help our customers with. And Pete, if you wouldn't mind going to just that slide you had up last. One of the interesting things is we have so many devices that can support a basic webcast. In our case, we're using our web cameras, and we each have our AirPods. We were talking before this that who would have thought that Bluetooth IFB is here, and guess what it is, right? Bluetooth microphones. We'll be trying different things out over the next few weeks, because that's just who we are. We love to experiment, but all these products are easily available to us. We put on the bottom here of the screen, you see a lot of these vendors from Blackmagic, Boxcast, Aja, where they take, and at some point, you know, when you're using a camera in a ballroom and you're getting audio from a soundboard, you're going to have to combine that. And these boxes do a really great job at those tasks. They're synced, they're ready to go, right? And so much of what we're doing now is going to be getting prepared to act quickly. When all this passes through, the calls are going to be coming in, and they probably aren't going to be giving us weeks notice. They're going to be giving us days notice, right? And while we're not the ones taking care of the content delivery network, and others are. We're helping to feed that. And Pete, why don't you go to the glossary page for a second? We'll be sharing and posting this to the website, and we'll share this this deck with you. It's nothing too fancy, but the idea was just to give you some basic vernacular here, or topics that we're going to keep digging on, and that is things like analog telephone adapter. Well, getting a phone line today in a ballroom is becoming harder and harder. How do we get onto the digital system? We use an analog telephone adapter, right? Audience response, we'll talk about that later. Codec, right? You'll hear that. That's almost an interoperable term when it comes to the streaming device. Well, that's a generic word for, it's going into the codec. It's coming out of the codec. Which codec are you using, right? What's the bit rate? That's all stuff that we don't have to worry about, other than to say, hey, here's the audio, and it's going to another room in an arena, even, right? Well, the resolution we need for a room that size is different than somebody sitting at home watching on their laptop, right? So there's a lot to that. Livestream.com has some great information on that, where you can understand bit rates better and see how audio and video correspond. You'll hear us talking about conference bridges. What are those? Well, those are essentially a third party combining everything, another mixer, right? Another audio mixer, balancing and keeping all those levels equal between each one. And then with an operator supported conference bridge, able to take them in and out of that conference, muting mics, things that, the three of us are doing on our control panels. Maybe not so well sometimes, but that's kind of what we're learning now. Mix minus, we're going to hear that a ton, and that is the routing of signal, where I'm sending something, but I'm not sending that person back to them, or I'm not sending myself back to myself, creating a loop. So we'll get into that in just a little while. POTS, plain old telephone service, right? Something that frankly is a dying platform, and is now all supported via digital. Even if you get a POTS line, it's still being converted most likely somewhere else to a digital signal, right? And
Kelly, I just wanted to add to that idea about the POTS line. 12 years ago, we would regularly order a POTS line in our webinars as a backup to our internet-based webinar. And now you can't get that. If your internet goes down, your phone system goes down. So an alternative to that is get an adapter from JK Audio for your cell phone and set it up to be in the network. So if you lose your internet, you can dial into the conference bridge that everybody's listening to and connect your webinar back into it.
Excellent point. That is a really great point, because everything comes down to the venue's internet connection. So on some of the larger events, we've been fortunate enough to have the budget so we could get the bandwidth from the building, and then get a secondary provider to bring in a bonded cellular connection, which allowed us to get data wirelessly into the room, because ironically, cell phone coverage has become so good now that in many cases, the cell phone quality is high enough, as well as that the data available, T-Mobile, while it's been a challenge that they've taken a lot of our RF spectrum in that auction, in return, they're giving us potentially an enormous amount of bandwidth and speed, all of which we need to do video and audio, right? So thinking about that, when we were talking about your basic webcast, we have point to point and point to multi-point, right? And what we're doing with you today is point to multi-point, even though we're doing point to point to point, and Pete and Mac and me, back to the conference bridge that is GoToWebinar, which is then going back out to all the various points around the US and the world, connecting us all up, and at the same time building a mix minus for me, for Mac, and for Pete. And if we bring anybody in on the line, it would do the same thing for you. So it's a pretty powerful tool. Now, that platform, good for smaller things like what we're doing here. If I need to go around the world to multiple offices for a company, if I need to bring in a lot of different systems, or I need to have secured information transmitted, while I could use this platform with some precautions taken, I might choose to do a private network or a dedicated platform that I own internally. It might be a combination of private public cloud, but I'm in control of that. And for that, I'll have, for my dedicated streaming platform, there I'll be using my codecs on either end. I'm not probably, I could be using a third party like Collective to act as that hub, but it has all the security necessary for my, that my company requires. So that takes us into a lot of a different conversation there. And Mac, I think that's where we'll kind of transition into you and what you're currently doing. You've gone from being out doing shows in the ballrooms and in the arenas and in the convention centers and like all of us, and had the people go, well, we're not getting together for the foreseeable future. That's the phrase that pays right now, foreseeable future, right? And now you've been able to go in. One of your customers has chosen, they built out early on, and they've chosen to continue communicating and broadcasting, but they have a studio. Why don't we talk a little bit about what's the same, what's different now for you?
Sure. Well, this is a client, financial services client that is internationally based. They have major operations in pretty much every country in the world, but their big headquarters are in New York, London, Tokyo, and Hong Kong. But they're in pretty much every country. And for the last 12 years, I've been doing their partner meetings, and their partner meetings happen in an auditorium at their facility. And there's probably 400 attendees in New York, and there's probably 500 attendees around the rest of the world who all are on what's essentially a webcast, but it happens over a private network. This company, being a financial company, relies on secure networks to do trading. And so they own their own private network, and they own the fiber, and everything goes around the world over fiber via audio video codecs. I don't know what brand they're using now. It used to be Tandberg 9000s, but it's basically a device that takes 1080 video and AES audio and sends it out onto the network, and then other codecs in other parts of the world can log into that one, so they can watch and listen, and they can also talk, and we can watch them. So it happens very similar to what we're doing here, except that it's an entirely private network. It's not, it can't be signed into publicly. But we've had as many as 70 sites that have two-way audio and video. And we usually have set up in the control room 17 mix minuses. And currently we actually have a broadcast console, and it actually has each channel has a mix minus button, which this is my first time working on a console that has that. And believe me, It's fantastic. But prior to that, we were using a DM2000. So we had 12 aux sends and 8 groups that we were able to make mix minuses out of. And you would just, with a group, you would create it just by assigning every input to a group except the one that you wanted to be mix minus. So, you know, aux 1 or group 1 could be, in Pete's description here, it could be New York. And so every outbound signal, I just lost my thought on that because that's not how it would work. But yeah, oh yeah, yeah. So group 1 would be the mix minus to, say, New York, and it would get every signal except New York's signal. And group 2 could be the mix minus to London, and it would get every channel except the London inbound channel. Because even though the codecs do have hybrids in them, the same way that GoToWebinar here has hybrids in it that lets it mix minus out our own audio. The teleconferencing codecs have that as well, but it's not very efficient. And it's really best practice is to always just send it a mix minus so that there's no chance ever of them hearing back what they're saying, because that would make a feedback loop. So you really want to keep them on a mix minus. And as I say, the mix minus could be created with groups or auxes on a normal console like we would be using for PA, or in the case of the console that I'm currently using at the studio, there's actually mix minus buses that just aren't intended to be that. They always program always goes to those, and then you hit the mix minus button and it just takes that channel out of that send. So you're just going to make a lot of output buses. Every mix minus is going to be an output bus, and that output bus is only going to go one place. It's going to go to whatever signal it is that's then coming back to you.
Right, exactly. So it's interesting. I knew this topic would probably be popular. This specifically, my audio mix minus. We had a question here. What are some tools for having a mix minus sent back to remote call-in users when not using a program that has the functionality built into it? So let's use an example of, you know, I'm not, with that question, I think maybe right now what we're describing is a two-way, right? Where you're sending to Tokyo and the presenter in Tokyo is listening to you because you're only sending New York. And then the audio mixer in Tokyo is only sending back the mics and the content generated in Tokyo to you, right? So we're minused out from one another. But in many cases of webcasts, it might be a one-way in. So it's a point to multi-point. So I might be transmitting something out, but then I need to get that far end back to me, but maybe it's not coming back in picture, right? Or maybe it is. It doesn't really matter, because we can bring that signal back on a phone bridge. We can bring that signal back if we're using like the platform we are today, GoToWebinar, and a simple USB audio interface to bring that as the audio source instead of the built-in microphone, right? And then the audio coming out of the laptop is the far end, or that caller, or that other person on the bridge. So again, that nulling, or that it's not even a nulling, because that's really for the crosstalk, and but rather just that minus is automatically built into the software. So I saw another question here, and Greg, around that. Why don't you reach out to me and let's talk about what your specific applications are, because I think we could go a little deeper on that. Because mix minuses can sometimes be a bit frustrating, especially on the far ends if you aren't ensured that what that person is putting in that mix isn't you. it's always a challenge. Now, Mac, you had a cool thing that you guys do for being able to verify using a multi-track to play back.
Yeah, it's less important, at least in my particular circumstances. It's less important than it was, say, 5 years ago or 10 years ago, when a lot of our overseas transmissions were going via satellite. So that we would have one satellite feed that would go to Asia, and in Asia we would be feeding Tokyo, Hong Kong, and Beijing, all on that one link. But it was 4 channels of audio available on the satellite, so we would send 3 different mix minuses: one for Tokyo, one for Hong Kong, one for Beijing. And we did this for like I don't know, 10 different locations. So we created a multi-track playback file on a computer and brought that into the console as idents. And each of those idents was routed in the console only to that outbound mix minus. So that prior to the show, when we were testing, we would be rolling that, and every far end would be getting a loop of me saying that this is the mix minus for Tokyo only, and then there'd be a about 15 seconds of tone so that they could know what kind of level we're sending, and then it would just keep looping that we would identify that this mix minus was for Tokyo, because if they took the wrong mix minus and we actually ever had to do an interactive back and forth with them, if they have the wrong mix minus, it's not going to work, and it's going to go into a feedback loop, because they are going to be getting themselves back again, just like all the other users on that Asia satellite should have been able to hear Tokyo. So the idents were pretty critical in that instance, because it was critically important to identify that the mix minuses were going where they were intended to go. Today, with it all done over networks and with network codec interfaces, it's a lot less critical. All we have to be sure of is that the mix minus we're sending out to the codecs is the correct one. So we actually, the company maintains a remote codec in one of their other sites, which has a webcam aimed at the control panel of the actual physical hardware codec. And we take each of our codecs and dial in to that one. And then we can look on the audio meter, and I can see that there's an ident going to it. And I go to the ident for the codec we're testing, and I turn off the ident, and I see it go away in the meter on the remote site. Turn it back on, it comes back. Okay, that mix minus is good. That is routed correctly. And so whoever signs on to that particular codec is going to get that mix minus. So that we still actually do it with those multi-track tones thing, but it could just be a tone. It doesn't, because I'm just looking at seeing the meters turn on and the meters turn off.
Sure.
As I interrupt the tone. So it could easily be done with tone. It doesn't have to be an ident, because we're now self-verifying on the network. We don't need the far end people to identify the mix minus like we did when it was over satellite.
Right. And one thing that I think is a good point here is that you're going across, working with, whether it's the video departments, everybody's working to the same end, right? So we have a lot of tools available to us, right? While we do have our team of audio, let's reach out to those others. Let's think about other technical solutions, right? Because sometimes the visual is the best way to check the audio. When I heard you talk about the metering, right? I'm using my eyes to verify my audio, because we're doing 4 or 5 things simultaneously, right? The other thing is just the importance of identifying, right? When we're doing a mic check, right? What city am I talking from, right? Keep it simple, keep it straightforward, but help me know that, I'm talking from, this is Kelly, and I'm in Manhattan, Illinois, in my undisclosed location in the basement, right? And that ident or identification is really important. So when I'm trying to troubleshoot something, who's someone, most of the time when I see people on those far ends, sometimes I'm lucky enough to maybe recognize that person, right?
Yeah.
If it's a multi-city with people we know, but a lot of times it may be people I've never met in my entire life. And I'm like, you know, yelling over video, who am I looking at right now? You know, who am I listening to? So I'm going to bring Pete in here. Let's talk about just briefly comms, Pete, on, you know, with this, you mentioned that there were some questions coming in about that.
Yeah, one person asked, in a show with lots of different departments working on a webcam, how would you all communicate? Well, the obvious question is, you have a comm system like you would on any regular show. In multiple sites, you use some kind of transfer system like either ClearComm LQ boxes or VCOM from Intracom systems to interconnect your comm systems in different sites. A reasonably, a very easy way to do it is the way that Mac and I did it on that financial show we did maybe 12, 13 years ago. We use AOL chat, or you can use your
That's
regular
how long ago it was.
chat. Oh yeah, right. Well, I'm always ready. I've got my AOL CD ready to reinstall it if I ever really need it. So there's a lot of different options, but a tech channel, a tech comm channel is really important, even as much as the production channel is on these shows. So however you do it, it's important to do that. Right now, we're using, as a tech channel for this webcast, our regular iMessage system. So we can talk back and forth amongst ourselves without any danger of us saying something nasty that you all might hear. We don't want that to happen.
Not that Pete would ever say anything inappropriate.
Never. Mac, there was another question which was sort of interesting. Where is it? A guy, Noel Helms just asked, he said, I've done mix minus extensively, but have a common problem. My main lectern mic hears the PA, therefore defeating my own mix minus efforts. How would you deal with this?
That is tough. It really, the sound system needs to be designed in such a way that there's really minimal audio that gets back to the lectern mic. I mean, that would be good, best practices anyway in setting up a PA, because the less of the PA that mic hears, the more gain before feedback you're going to get. And that's going to be important in the PA sense.
John Landsman asked if there's any advantage to using a Dugan in addition to a mix minus to help with this situation.
Yeah, I mean, for the last 20 years, I don't know that I've ever done a show without a Dugan. No more Model Ds anymore. Now it's all built in. Although my current job, the only one I can do now while everybody's on hiatus, is I'm doing a once a week webcast for this financial services company, and just lost track of that thought.
Well, it has. I think you mentioned it has gain sharing built into the console, right? Versus
right. This console has an auto mixer in it that I don't think is particularly sensible. I really wish they had just gone ahead and paid Dan whatever he likes to use his algorithm. Although it's off patent, so they could steal it and he would have no recourse. But companies like Yamaha and others are happy to pay him to have his name on it. And they use his algorithm. This particular company created their own, and I don't think it's as good. It's not as seamless as a Dugan. But to that point, the Dugan helps break that feedback loop, because
when the far end's talking,
from the far end talking, it doesn't really do anything for your PA leaking into the presenter mic. But when the far end talks, that'll come out of the PA, but by the far end talking, that will duck the presenter mic on your live stage. So it will hear less of the PA because he's not talking into it.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, if there's a webcast, if there's a teleconference, if there's a satellite involved, as far as I'm concerned, every input goes on a Dugan channel, right?
Yeah.
My mic's in the room, my returns from the teleconference, my returns from satellite, webcast, wherever it is, right?
There's no motivation not to, because it is completely seamless and sounds great. There's no motivation not to have everything on a Dugan, assuming that you have the channels available, which on many of the consoles that people use every day during, for instance, live audience conferences, those manufacturers are building plenty of Dugan channels in.
Right, and also we've got a couple other tools at our disposal, not necessarily designed specifically for that, but have found a benefit, and that would be something like a Cedar or WNS from Waves, right? Where that noise reduction system in some ways has helped that. Again, the multi-band EQs that we now have available to us do help some of that, but nothing will ever replace the fundamental system design. I mean, TV for years has been doing distributed PA systems, right? Where lots of speakers at lower levels. The downside is when you're doing a launch event, or you're doing something that, you've got a live band, it's not really exciting to listen to it through that, right?
It's got videos that are going to be super loud.
Exactly, right? I want a stereo music, but then the voice, well, again, voice PA coupled with a music PA. As things are changing again, if I have a dedicated web, a lot of the web shows I do now, I don't even really have a PA. I have some foldback speakers, and they're listening to the far end. It's not very exciting for those presenters, but it's more of a TV show. But when we have to bridge, whether it's a pharmaceutical event, or whether it's a financial or product launch, we're always having to kind of merge those two together. So system design is going to play a really big part in, and if you know that the webcast is a significant component of what you're doing on a show, that may be a great opportunity to open the discussion up with the production manager and the producer and the set designer and say, hey, I understand that our audience outside this room is expected to be pretty significant in size, or who's listening could be a lot of significant thought leaders, for instance. I need to ask some favors on where my speakers go and how many speakers I have. Let's not be afraid. One thing we're learning in this world right now is don't assume anything. A week ago, life looked a lot different, didn't it? So I'm willing to look at that and how I do audio and say, hey, everything's on the table. I can at least ask, right? And I can do my best to negotiate a little better position and make more friends in my lighting department. So I go, like, where that fixture is, boy, my speaker would go really well there, right? Thank you very much. So a lot of stuff we can fix technically. Thank you, Dan Dugan, for really changing the entire landscape.
Changing the landscape,
the Cedars, the WNSs, all these other tools we have, and our multi-bands, and really EQ that we didn't have available 20 years ago, right? But again, let's go back to the fundamentals. This is what's most important. Pete, I want to go back to one thing on comms real quick that and tie this.
Let me quickly relay a question to Mac. Michael McDermott wants to know if the mix you do are pre-fade or post-fade.
Post-fader, because otherwise they're always live to the world, to all the other
you want to control what's actually going out, right?
You're still gonna control it on the mixer. So all the mix minuses want to be post-fade.
So Kelly, now an important question, comms.
Oh, yes, it's all about comms, because that's like the first word in our what used to be our website. Anyhow, Mac, you mentioned that you have this video codec. Now this is SDI going in that, correct?
Right.
So SDI gives us up to 8 channels of audio. Thank you to our friends in the video department. Well, program's taking up 2 channels of that, right?
Right.
And we have a return path coming back with our audio. So that, by my calculations, leaves me with 6 channels of unused audio in this. Boy, where do we bring in comms on this?
Right.
We have a number of available channels, don't we?
Right. I don't know about the particular codecs that we're using in the studio today, but I have done remote comms exactly that way. I mean, actually Pete and I did a multi-level marketing meeting that was in two different arenas. I was at Thomas and Mack, Pete was at the MGM Garden Arena, and we had 8 channels of comm that went as embedded audio over SDI video, because video was being shared between the 2 arenas so that there was a dedicated SDI video fiber. So it was getting embedded through an AJA, so we just broke out all 8 channels of the AJA that went from Thomas and Mack to MGM, and all my talk paths to Pete went on that AJA. And
on that show, we actually had 16 comm channels because
right,
8 of them went via the VoIP card in the Riedel system.
Right, exactly. But the VoIP card was a pain in the ass. Would have been better if we had 16 channels of embedded audio.
Well, you know, plain old garden variety 4-wire, i.e.
Right.
the embedded channels or anything, is always easier. Anytime you add any other piece of equipment in the line there's a little bit of time taken in setting it up.
And
ultimately,
and a loss in audio quality.
And ultimately, it is a smoother operation once you've got the path set up than programming it in, because it's integrated into your comm system.
Right. Yeah, I think if we ever did that show again, I would see if we could get a couple of Rios, Yamaha Rios, and just make
a couple of Rios or a couple of LQ.
Point-to-point Dante network would have been
a couple of Rios or a couple of LQ systems in there. If we were using all HelixNet in each site, throw in 2 LQs and bingo, they're all connected together.
Right.
Really the way to go.
I'll say as an audio mixer, I'd like to take dibs on a couple of those embedded channels for remote AR mics, where maybe I might say to my far end, hey, send me your program, but send it dry, and then send me a bus with your AR mics, so I can wet it up on my end a little differently. Or if I need to save this and archive this for the post folks, I can ISO those channels out on a local recorder, right? And you know, I can do a lot more with dry. I can make something wet, but I can't make something dry quite as
you
easily.
You can't dry it out.
Exactly. And so we've got some things that are easy to affect there. I will tell you, I was just working on a project prior to my calendar clearing for the next couple months, and we were talking through exactly this. We were setting aside our comms channels and doing these kind of things, and a conversation came up when I spec'd, hey, I need to make sure there are embedders and de-embedders on both sides, right? Because we had a codec that's a downstream and a codec that's upstream. So we're sending program to them, they're sending program to us, right? 2 different devices, makes it nice and easy. But I said, can you please make sure that each has have an embedder for the one unit and a de-embedder for the other unit? There's no problem. Here's the model I'm looking at. And then all of a sudden I see AES on it. I'm like, oh, I need this to be analog, because not only do that's right. I don't just need to get audio out of that console. I need to get analog comm into it, like with the Studio Technologies box we see here, this ClearComm breakout. And so it was important that I said, make sure that it's an analog embedder, analog de-embedder for that application. So this kind of segues us really nicely into our next question, which is about sync, picture, and sound, right? Yeah, yeah. So don't measure us by the quality of this one. But there was a great question here by Edward had regarding lip sync, and not only lip sync between webcasts, but we have lip sync for we have a webcast leaving the room, we have records, and oh yeah, we have IMAG, and maybe that IMAG is on an LED wall, or IMAG is on projection, right? So we have all these multiple points of time and latency involved here, and that brings us into the QC component of our discussion, right? Quality control. How do I manage all these disparate needs, and where the big question, where is zero, right? What is our reference point? And in your case, let's take the easy one here, which is in the studio. What are you looking at to make sure that lip sync is good?
I'm looking at the program monitor, which is the first place the video hits. Well, it's the same depth of delay as hitting the network that's going out for transmission. But right off the video switcher, when they bring it up on the program monitor, that's the one we use for lip sync, because that's the closest one to the video switcher. I have a whole
multi-viewer, right?
Right, not a multi-viewer, because that's got at least a frame of delay in it to create the multi-view. And what other processing they've used, pretty much every process they add in the video chain adds a frame of delay to the video, whereas the audio is going through in real time. So the codecs we use is 2 frames. So I delay our signal to the codec by 2 frames to keep it in sync. But yeah, I look at the monitor which has the least amount of latency in it, which is the preview and program monitors on the video wall. And I have a monitor that shows me all the codecs coming back. And if I look at that, I mean, it's literally a second out of sync, because it's going to Bangalore and then it's coming back from Bangalore. And so the ideally you would have an analog monitor, or at least video guys always want to have an analog monitor to check lip sync. But as far as I'm concerned, what's the point? Nobody watching it has an analog monitor. Everybody's going to be watching it on some sort of LED monitor. So that's what we should be actually looking at for the sync, is how it looks on an LED monitor, which is what's going to be.
For lip sync, it's particularly important to test it for your video on your live show. The worst thing a client can see is somebody standing at a lectern and the video IMAG behind them is all wrong.
But it has to be. You can't fix that.
Well, you can take some of the processing out of the circuit to make it better.
Yeah, you can reduce the video processing
and
to get it closer.
Playback, if you're doing video playback, you've got to make sure that audio is synced right with your screen. The client is going to scream and yell at you because their playback doesn't look right. They're not going to care about what the webcast looks like.
Once you're in a ballroom, though, all bets are off, because every 60 feet back in the audience is another frame of delay.
Well, they're that. So just have the whole audience stand by the PA.
Yeah, I mean, I've argued with producers about that, because all the big executives sit in the front row, and they go, no, the lip sync has to be good in the front row. Well, okay, well then it's going to be way the hell off in the back row, because you get about a 60-foot window.
Well, yeah, live
where sync is going to be acceptable, plus or minus 1 frame. Sync will be acceptable, and that's 60 feet of audience depth. So if lip sync has to be good in the front row, that means anybody farther away than 60 feet from the stage is going to be increasingly out of sync. And there's just nothing you can do about that. You have to pick where in the audience you want that 60.
But the video playback, you've got to check it with that, because that does have to be in sync.
Right, and I think that's the whole point here, right?
Exactly. Check it.
It can't be in sync in a live audience.
Yes, it can.
No,
Video playback. Video playback from a tape, from a computer. The voice and picture.
No.
Well, no.
Cannot be in sync.
What I'm saying is, if you're standing right next to the PA, and your sync is out, it's wrong. You're right. At the end of the back of the room, it's going to be wrong.
But if you're sitting in the middle of the room, then and your sync is in right, then it's right. You have to choose.
Yeah, I know. But the point is,
60 feet of the audience.
The point is, in this business, there's so many different components in there that can affect the latency. You've got to make sure that stuff is not adversely affecting your playback.
Right.
I've been on shows where the playback was a second behind the picture, and boy, you heard from the client in a second. It can't be that far off.
So what I'm going to do, this accomplished exactly what I wanted, which was I was able to get about 8 or 9 opinions from 3 different people. Exactly. We wanted to see that. I mean, everybody wants. It's like WWE, right? But the point here is the most important takeaway I think I took out of this whole debate, if you will, is a few things. Number one, we recognized what were our destinations here, right? We have a webcast, we have recording, and we have a screen, right? All three having different needs and different latencies, right? So I'm gonna put to a side for just a little bit what the proper procedure is for finding zero in any one of those, but rather to say best practice, we want to ensure that each one of these destinations have a discrete send that has the ability to have delay put on it, right, and manage, right? So we know that if somebody says, hey, I want to stream this event now, I want everybody to be able to watch the show. Well, that needs to be on an aux or a matrix, right? That's separate from whatever I'm doing in the room and whatever's going to records, right? So we know that because A, I got to be able to manage time, B, I've got to be able to manage levels, and C, I've got to be able to take it to audio black just in case, right? Nothing worse than when somebody walks up to you in the middle of a show and goes, I need to feed this right now, right? And we go, oh, cool, well, I'll just mult that off, or I'll split it off of my Rio. Here, just go grab that feed. And then they go, hey, I need you to black out the phone feed. Well, I'm feeding it off of my record feed. If I black out the phone now I kill my records, right?
Yeah.
Plug it, right? That's your only hope. So anyhow, that's where, for me, I always want to make sure that I have a separate output for every destination that I have, right? Whether it's to manage the time, the delay, or to manage the level, or to manage just generally on-off signal. In my case, I typically ask the video department, if I've got a webcast involved, to have it run through one of their routers. So audio and video get synced up in the embedder, right? So my sync, I find sync, they're embedded, they travel together as picture and sound, right? But they go through a router, so then when I need to rehearse in the room, they can go to bars and tones, so the remote end can see something or hear something, right? But I don't have to, and I'll still want to ask, you sure you want this audio going there, right? Because I'm not in the far end, I don't know for sure, right? But we know that we have to have that. And so the return feed, if you have something leaving the room, like a phone bridge, my general feeling is I always land the return on my console, even if they promise me we're not going to take one question, right? The last time I did that, the executive couldn't get into the airport because of weather, and we ended up having to bring the CEO in on a phone bridge, right, to address the audience, right? Well, they promised me it was an outbound only. Well, we're just going to listen to it. I promise you, just going to listen to it. Famous last words, right? So if a device has a two-way connection option, I always plumb it. I always send to it, and I always receive from it. If I don't need it, I don't get paid by the input, but it's worth having, right?
Right. Well, I do get paid by the input, so I stack up as many as I can.
There you go. Then take as many as you can. Exactly. Let's keep going down this QC, right? Because time being that, all right, sync being what it is. We talked about screens, we talked about web streaming, we talked about records, all of which could have different sync requirements, right? Now let's add to that discussion where people are watching this, all right? So in your case, they're watching it in a conference room or in an auditorium or on their laptop at home, right? It's a private network. So being able to view that, you're relying on the far end, right? To say yes, everything looks good, everything sounds good, right?
Right. We do a pre-show fax where we talk to the far end.
Hang on 1 second. Fax. Are you sending them stuff on thermal paper and a dial-up?
Absolutely. That's the only way. No, full facilities. That's what fax means.
Facilities check, right?
Full facilities check. And so for the 2 hours prior to the show, which unfortunately means this rehearsal starts at 5:30 a.m. because the show is usually at 7:30 a.m. For those 2 hours, we are connecting with every site on the broadcast, and we have someone on stage going, "Hello, this is New York. How do we look and sound to you?" And they respond and tell us how we look and sound to them, and we thereby know how they sound and look to us. Many of those sites are actually on, we didn't actually mention codec bridges, but we have 8 codecs available to us with 8 mix minuses that can go outbound with video and audio. But we don't really, although we test two-way audio with all of them, we're not going to allow two-way audio during the show. They're going to be, most of them are going to be listen only. But we have 4 what we call direct connects, which we have 4 codecs that go to 4 worldwide offices that are important offices with big auditoriums. And there's always the possibility of getting audio from them. I mean, we return everything into the console, but several of them are bridges where they go to Mumbai, and Mumbai logs 20 people onto each of these codecs. So we get back a window that shows 20 little boxes of who's on that codec. But we don't, we don't really listen to them because it's clumsy enough to try to get to one of those if there was a question that it would take so long it would be pointless. But the main offices that we connect to direct, we could take a question live from them at any time. They're on a fader. If I'm looking at that and they suddenly switch to a guy that they want to talk to us, up comes the fader and we can talk to them.
So now, quick question though. If you're relying on that far end, which is important, right? And that's our tech bridge we talked about earlier, that we want all our cities able to communicate back via phone. Ideally, if it's tied into intercom, it makes things more convenient. But worst case, how do you the phone bridge is running simultaneously, you mentioned, right? How do you normally deal with QC within the mix room that you're in? Did you we talked about that listening phone bridges, backup lines?
For QC of what the far end is, we have somebody who sits next to me on a telephone who's on the telephone bridge. So he's listening to the conference call, which is audio only. And he's just making sure that maintains its quality. And then we usually have someone else in the control room who is logged on to one of the far sites. So they're watching it. And we do have returns from all the far sites so that if someone has a problem, we see them go dark. And so we know, I mean, we're looking at video for up to 70 sites coming back to us.
Yeah, I mean, that's sure. You get to a certain point, you're waiting for something to break, right? At that point, and somebody's going to alert you somehow, email, text,
Yes,
whatever.
well, anywhere where there's an AV tech at the far end, they're on the video tech conference call, which is plumbed into our intercom system. So I have it on my intercom panel, and the AV head guy has it on his intercom panel, and the producer has it on his intercom panel. And so we can communicate with the AV techs all around the world on that comm system, which it's very often a cell phone on their end, because it's just set up as a conference call. We happen to get into the conference call via our intercom system. It's an RTS Atom system that has eight TIFs in it, which is a TIF is a telephone interface built into the intercom system. So, you know, you can put the TIF on your panel, and you just dial out from the intercom panel to connect to the conference call, and that gets that tech bridge into our comm system. So then within the Atom, we put the conference call wherever it needs to go.
So there is an example of the highest end application, right? You know, whether that's RTS Atom or whether that's Riedel, that's that, you know, okay, I've got a great platform with all these, in some cases, a luxury, right? In other cases, we're doing shows that might be going out on Facebook Live, maybe going out on YouTube, right? And we're going to connect up. You know, number one, you may have to just use a cheap free conferencecall.com bridge and send that out to all your audio buddies that are working the show with you, and go, hey, dial in here. I'm gonna put this earbud in here on one ear, and I'm gonna have my comm on the other, and I'm gonna try and mix the house all at the same time. But I need that confidence to know we're watching each other's back, right? How do we do that? What do we use? You know, one of the tools I like to use is Skype out. When I'm doing a project that might have a much more simplified comm setup, and it's got a standard analog 2-wire belt pack that we're all used to, then I can build an interface thanks to Pete's wiring diagram to break out the mic and the earphone, and grab an IL-19, or maybe if I have that ability, I'll grab a ClearCom or a Studio Tech 2 to 4 wire. Pete, do you have the ability to pull up that little picture I had of the little USB interface and a laptop on our slide here? But the idea being, back to just a second, here we go. This is my just get out of jail free $35 USB interface, and then I'll run anywhere from Skype out. I'll put $5 on there, and that usually gets me through just about any show in the world. I can dial into my conference bridge, and then I'll bring that into my Studio Tech or into the ClearCom 700 box, or worst case, I carry a little breakout so I can grab an extra belt pack, and or I'll go to AV Lifesavers there, and they've got some great products for analog interfaces. A lot of this is just about being prepared for things that just nobody thinks about. I would like to talk with Sync for 1 second. I want to go back to that contentious little topic, and QCing of things. In your situation, this is a closed network. And in other situations where Facebook Live, YouTube, go to webinar like we're using, these are much more open platforms. Maybe they're public-facing events, right? And how do I know that's good? And in my case, I'll use an iPad, and I'll ask the client for a login credential, and I'll plug into the iPad with a set of earphones or headphones and go over and listen to that. Now that shows 30 seconds to who knows how far behind, but helps me to understand what it sounds like at the destination, because potentially this person's watching on an iPad, this person's watching on an iPhone, this person's watching on headphones, this person's annoying the neighbor next to them because they got their speakerphone on, right? and it could be any number of things, but at least we do that. The other thing is we got a team of people with us, whether that's our A2, our system engineer, our comms manager. As our projects get bigger, we have more people, right? So they can help be a part of that QC process and ensure that, you know, hey, I'm hearing a problem over here. Do you have your mix minus built correctly? I've been fortunate to have people have my back and point out, hey, I'm hearing something I'm probably not thinking you want going there, right? And save my bacon and usually buy them a dinner or a nice cold drink. Pete, do you have any notes about, I saw your 4-wire drawings and a few other things like that.
Chris Sakai asked a question, which we're going to cover in much finer detail in our webinar, but I wanted to switch over to that just for a real quick second and address it. On the website, on the Best Audio website, in the download section, you can go to a thing called hybrid theory, which is right at the top here, which is basically explains how a hybrid works. And the main thing is, in comms audio, you have 2-wire comms, which basically is a single wire with audio going both directions on it. It's the way your phone worked originally, going into your homes. It forever, even to this day, still works. There's a ground wire and a hot wire, and your audio comes in on single wire, which means when you talk, the audio goes out. When somebody else talks to you, the audio is coming to you, but basically it's mixed into one channel.
Right, it's a single talk bus.
It's a single talk bus. Now, when AT&T first invented how to get audio all across the United States, they couldn't put an amplifier in that line because the audio really is going both directions. So they had to come up with a way to separate out the directions of the audio. So they had to be able to tell, is the audio coming from the 2-wire line or is the audio going to the 2-wire line? Now in this drawing, you see on the left-hand side, the 2-wire intercom connection, audio is going both directions. And on the right-hand side, you see 4-wire audio output and 4-wire audio input. Now these are mono-directional audio. So you basically have balanced audio going in each direction for the same conversation. And if we were just to wire those together, sure enough, the audio output would go into the 2-wire, the 2-wire output would go into the input, but the input of the 4-wire would also go into the output. Well, what you do in a hybrid is you basically subtract out any audio that comes in the 4-wire audio input from the output. And a lot of times that's done just by listening with a pair of headphones to the output and putting a beep on the input. A lot of equipment like manual equipment has that. And a lot of equipment like Studio Technologies models 47, 45, 46 automatically do that nulling. And that's basically what it's about. But the main distinction in comms, which takes a while to teach people, is 4-wire versus 2-wire. And we'll go into this a lot more on our comms webinar, but Chris Sakai asked that question. And of course, I want him to know because he's running all the remaining online gaming shows in the United States, I think. I'm not sure which.
No, those are excellent point. Go ahead, Mac.
I just saw, there was a question I saw a few minutes ago that I can't actually see now, but it was a question asking about how mix minuses work on a broadcast console. Because we explained about using groups and auxes to create a mix minus on what might be a PA console, where you have to assign your program everywhere except to the channel that is the mix minus. On a broadcast console, there will be mix minus buses built into it. And there will be a mix minus mode where you just go to a channel and you select that mix minus, and that is automatically everything in the program except that channel. And it just creates that automatically. It's called a mix minus, and it's just full program until you take a channel and remove it from that one. And then within the console routing software, you have to route those mix minus outputs to the proper output ports to get to where you want it to go. But the way the mix minus actually functions in the console is you're not assigning a whole mix and then not assigning the one thing that you wanted minused out of that mix. You're just selecting the thing you wanted minused out, and it automatically sends full program except that. It's
right.
just
so happening
it's
in
sort
the
of
background.
yeah, it's sort of a reverse way of looking at it, and the console's designed so that it automatically does that function because in broadcast it's used so often.
Right, exactly. You don't have time to dial up everything. You just assume everything needs to go to that reporter, right? And you're done, right? So that's a good point. Thanks for going back to that. I think we've kind of gone through a lot of these from a QCing. The one item before we move on, I would like to talk about is the role of AR mics in the web stream, right? And how they fit into QC is those people listening to the feed for you help you make sure that your show's not swimming, right? Right. But at the same time, the listeners are receiving a good experience. What are a couple, again, this one probably will have the same number of answers that setting delay has, because there are so many different perspectives on that. But just give me two things that you would suggest doing when it comes to AR mics for web streams, and in a sense, it would apply to records as well, but definitely for streaming.
Well, you really want AR mics because it really will make the whole web stream sound better. The problem is if you're in a big room with a PA, the more audience reaction mics are up, the more boom of the room you hear. So that's definitely, I mean, usually when I'm in that situation and I'm setting the level of audience response mics, I just keep listening and I turn up the audience response mics until I hear them negatively impacting the audio, and then I pull them back so they're not negatively impacting the audio anymore, because I don't really want to go any higher than that I don't want to mess up the primary mix. But you do want to be able to hear if the audience does applaud, if they laugh at jokes. All that stuff is you want that to be on your program. People, I mean, that adds to the quality of the outbound mix. Very often I have if I have more than a couple of audience reaction mics, I'll have them on a VCA, and I'll have the VCA set at like -20, and that as I turn up the audience mic, I pick that audience reaction mic level that I'm listening to, and then I pull it back a little bit, but then I've got a handle where I can gas it up. I mean, if there's a big moment where you really want to get a lot of that applause, then I have a handle I can push to gas it up. And what I've always wanted to do, and I've never gotten around to, is build a GPI adapter for a instrument volume pedal that you could then program in most digital consoles these days to be a remote volume control on a VCA. So then you could have your audience reaction on a foot pedal. So you don't even have to take your hands off the primary faders. If you have to hit the audience reaction, you just hit the foot pedal.
Sure, that's a great point. And what I heard that was important, it sounded like you had a number that you could always come back to, right? If you were mixing both what was going on in the room and what was going on the web, you always had a reference point that you could at least go back to, because you're listening to the room, you're listening to the PA, you're not listening to AR mics.
No, I'm not on headphones. Well, I mean, now I am, but when I was doing this in a room with a live audience, I'm not down there listening to them. So yeah, you have a level you set, but then maybe you want to be able to, in certain instances, gas it up.
Right, exactly.
So VCA is good for that. because the VCA is also good because then I can bury the AR mics on another layer. I don't need to have access to them. I just need their remote control.
A lot of live TV mixers will use a foot pedal for AR mics normally.
Yeah,
because they're always having to bring AR in and out all the time for live TV.
Yeah,
right. And to that point, you know, I think we listen to all these TV shows, and man, that audience sounds awesome. You know, if you're listening to Fallon or Kimmel, or you're listening to an award show, and what we forget is that they have multiple mics. Number one, they have a lot of time compared to probably what we do, and they have someone dedicated to just sweetening the audience, right? And that's great. And of course, that's what everybody references this to. But sometimes, you know, like, what would you consider your typical microphone arrangement for ARs? So, you know, if you just like, hey, where do I put them in, and what are some mic choices you might do in terms of patterns?
Well, my personal choice is to start off with shotguns, usually short shotguns like a you know, Sennheiser 416 size, not an 816, or a what's that Sennheiser? I forget the numbers, but
66.
No, that's the real cheap one. What's the one that's got RF biasing? Yeah. But short shotgun, because what I'd like to do is put the audience reaction mics fairly close to the PA, so that any bleed from the PA into the audience reaction mics is in time with the live sound. So you do not, if it does bleed in, you don't notice it so much because it's swamped out by the direct audio. You're not getting an echo. If you have to put it farther out in the house, you can perhaps pick up less PA and get more audience, but what you do pick up from the PA is going to be way out of time, and is going to add more of that hollow sound of the room. So I tend to like to get them closer to the PA so that the PA leakage into the audience reaction is not noticeable because it's actually in time with the direct audio. And I like to run them in stereo because, to me, it gives a bigger presence of the room. I think it just sounds much better. And I know we talked earlier about stereo mics like a VP88, which is also another great audience reaction mic that you just put in the center, and it gives you a stereo mix.
Right,
So,
for these quick, you know, which is kind of the world we're living in right now, and we're going to probably be living in for a while, which is get in there, get up, get going, get out, right? And how do we do something that's reproducible over and over and over and quantify? And that kind of brings us to our next topic here. Pete, if you could pull that up. These are two things I'm really passionate about. One is loudness monitoring and the ability to quantify over time how loud a mix is. And one of the boxes I like to use, I carry this in my road box, is the TC Electronic Clarity M. They have a stereo version, and they have another version that will support up to 5.1 using AES input. And on the 5.1 model, you can turn off the other 4 channels and metering, so you just see the first 2. It has a vector scope. It has an RTA. It has what was the other function? RTA, vector, and the radar. I use the radar primarily, and the vector. Those are my top 2 ones. Vector helps me in seeing stereo relationships. So if I've got a video playing back and one channel has inadvertently gotten flipped, it shows up very quickly, either to my left or to my right. Yeah, exactly. The other thing with the radar that it does is it gives me my levels regularly, in terms of overtime, I should say regularly. You choose what your reference is, a -20. If I know something's going out on the web, I'll reference -16. which is a setting that this unit has that allows you to then mix your loudness hotter, because again, we were talking earlier about destinations. Are we going to an iPhone? Are we going to an iPad? Are we going to computers? Or are we going to a recording deck that's going to be used later to post? Well, in the US, minus 20 dBFS is our zero, if you will, reference. With webcasting, boy, you know, we can get you want to talk top LU, right? Loudness units. We can go round and around, spend hours on that. The point is, at some point, you just pick something to quantify to. Pete, if you could go ahead to the next box. One of the items I carry specifically for webcasts is this broadcaster processor. It's the DB Max. I found one on eBay. Really like it. It has all kinds of it's built off the finalizer, but it's meant for transmission. It's meant to process things just before they go out, whether you're going to a studio transmission link or whether you're going to the World Wide Web. They have different programs. In my case, I chose the World Wide Web program they have in there, and it's a multiband compressor, but then it also will behave a lot like a leveler, like an L2 plugin would on Waves, where it maximizes that output for your input. And then as you exceed whatever your reference is, so if you're referenced to minus 20 or if you're referenced to minus 16, whatever you're referencing it to, when you look on the right-hand side of the display there, you'll see those 3 bars. That's the multiband compressor. And as that information's coming in, it's compressing what's necessary while raising the overall output to a target output. Now, if I'm going to an iPhone or an iPad or a laptop, generally, I'd love to maximize as close to 0 dBFS as I could. This has look-ahead limiting, so it's basically adding a slight amount of delay to it, looking at it, and making sure that you don't clip, right? So we want as much level as we can, whereas the record feed, I'm not going to want to do that. I want to send them a reference they're gonna take to the post house, or they're gonna take to their editing suite, and it's gonna be more consistent and lower, so they have a little more to work with there. The downside to the hotter levels is everything's hotter, right? So my mixes, the dilemma I always have is my 2 mixes sound different, right? Because effectively, if I was averaging minus 12 on my records, you know, for overall loudness, you know, 16 to 12, but my web was going out as close to 0 as possible. My ARs sound different. My everything sounds different, right? So this is where QC starts to come into play, and needing more teams with you. You know, worst case, get that signal out, make it sound good. I was talking to a friend of mine earlier this week, Jim, and we were talking about what at the end of the day is most important: hitting your cues and being consistent, right? We can argue about levels, we can argue about all these other features, but at the end of the day, when we're doing a show, we got to hit our cues, and we want to be consistent, cue after cue, show after show, right? So boxes are cool. I love toys. I love tools. But do we have to have them? No. Our what we're doing, executing is more important there. Pete, any notes thus far that you'd like to put in? And you're muted.
And I'm muted. Yes, that's one thing. Oh, when you're doing a webcast, make sure that when your mouth moves, sound comes out. Brian Maddox brought up a subject that is probably the most financially important part of your webcast. If you're doing a webcast and the producer comes out and says, just play a bunch of music for walk-in, you know, I don't care, use whatever you want, and you throw on Eye of the Tiger, bango, you're going to get a phone call the next day from somebody who says you're not supposed to use that. So this should be one of the audio person's most important contribution to making the producer not look bad. It's picking music that either you've already licensed, or at least checking with the producer what licenses you already have, you know, and that kind of stuff. So it's really important to do. Now, these sites we have up on the screen right now are a bunch of different places that allow you to buy either a license for a single use, such as Song Trader, but are all built into one website. So you find the piece, you tell it how you're using it, you tell it what kind of show you're going to be on, and it's all built in there. So you don't have to go through a lot of crazy things like emailing BMI and ASCAP. These are basically, oh, here's BMI over there on the left. But these are all great sites, and we'll certainly have all these links on our website for you as the sound person to pre-organize something that the producer is not going to get in trouble for.
Right. I've had that experience personally. It's a nerve-wracking experience to have when somebody streams out on Facebook Live your entire walk-in that they weren't supposed to, right? And somehow it's always audio's fault that something bad happened, right? It's like, even if the picture goes bad, what's wrong with the audio? Well, the picture's black, the audio's still there, but it's obviously audio's fault. I get it, it's okay. But you'll see on here, this runs the gamut of the BMI. These are folks that work for a living, that these artists create. You know, sure, some artists make more than others, but their creativity comes a lot of work on their part, and so this is how we work within that system. If your show can't afford that trademarked name brand copyrighted music that's so recognizable, there are so many sources out here. Thank you, John, for pointing out one of these sites here down in the bottom left-hand corner. There are a multitude of options now, and the costs are pretty minimal. My rule of thumb, if it sounds cool, it's expensive. All right, that's just kind of, if you really like how the song sounds, I can tell you every time I've auditioned music for a producer who's like, okay, let me hear some play-ons for this, and I'll go, okay, it's a webcast. Is it open or closed? Right? We ask a few questions, ask the rights questions, and then we start playing. Oh, I really like that one. I'm like, yep, I figured you would. That's going to be a really expensive one. You go and you listen to these other ones. You're like, oh, yep, I don't like that one as much, but you're going to really like the price, right? Because it's a little cheaper. So always ask these questions. I do joke that another friend of mine said, you know, I don't make the hits, I just play them. And at the end of the day, we're going to be given the files, ideally, to play. Other times we're collaborative, and they're like, can you help me out with what you have? Will you, you know, I'm not a lawyer, so I can't tell you that if you play something that you provided them, you'll be in trouble or not in trouble. But what I can tell you from experience is that if you give someone a piece of music and they think they have the rights to use it and they don't, and they get an email or a phone call asking for a significant contribution, they're going to come back to you and go, what'd you do to me, right? Why did you give me that piece of music? You could have told me this was going to cost me $10,000, right? And so our job, I feel, is to say, hey, I've got access to a lot of different things. Help me understand what you need to do. And then here's the paperwork for that. Thank you very much. And make sure that everything's appropriate, because I do believe strongly that people that create should be given that due respect. And the system for us showing that respect is through the licensing process. And we have a lot of opportunities, as I mentioned before, to do that. Pete?
Mac, just go ahead.
No, that's fine. Go ahead.
Jason Glass asked a real simple question. How you EQ your ARs? How high do you set your high pass filters, for instance?
I don't think Jason has ever asked a simple question.
Well, it's very short. It's a short question, but very.
I usually high pass them fairly high, at least 200, and it could be as high as 400. Because it's really the sound of applause that I want to hear, and that I don't care about losing the low end in the ARs. So yeah, it's at least 200, could be as high as 400. You listen to the room, see what it sounds like.
And do you use any kind of Dugan and or ducking on the AR mics?
Not on the AR mics, no.
But the AR
Although
mics,
I
you don't
have,
want to use ducking on them. You just manually control them.
yeah, although I have thought about that particular question, because if you did use a Dugan on the AR mics, if there may be a way, you'd have to go into the Dugan control panel in order to set the weighting, but there may be a way to set it so that when there is a lot of applause, that the Dugan opens up the AR mics.
I'll jump in here. I've got some friends in the broadcast community. That's exactly what they do for talk shows.
Actually, yeah, Dan Gerhardt does that.
It's very popular. Again, they have a little more time than we do. The downside is when you get that loud clapper, loud talker that stands right in front of your one AR,
Right.
And
they're going to be affecting,
become fixated on them, right?
Yeah.
That is the downside to auto mixing. But man,
Right.
you can do some dynamic stuff with that, right? And that's a powerful tool even on ARs to be able to balance.
Yeah, so yeah, I do know people who have done it. I personally have not.
Yeah,
On the
I
other
find
end
it intriguing.
On the other end of the spectrum, Chopper is asking if you do any high frequency emphasis on your AR mics.
No, I don't really use emphasis EQ. Well, I won't say never, but no, not much.
Yeah.
Usually it's about getting clarity out of a loft that's gotten buried under a collar or something. But I don't use much boost EQ at all. Oh, and Dave Zammit, thanks. Yeah, MKH60.
Yeah.
The elusive model numbers.
Yeah.
As we get older, they seem to be even far more elusive.
So what's amazing is that's what PRG sends out in their work box as AR mics.
Sure.
Thank you, Dave Chessman, for that one.
Has gotten labeled for that by sort of. Oh, here MKH60, we must be doing AR mics. Okay. So we've covered a lot of ground here, and I'm sure we could keep talking forever. And a lot of you asked some great questions, and I really appreciate what you joining us. And we're going to try to start doing this every single day, starting next week at this time. And we may even find subjects that we want to do twice a day. If we have a huge group number of people want in, we might do an 11 a.m. and a 4 p.m. And what I'd love to hear from you all is what time of the day is good. I don't know. We picked 4 because I figured then all those people in LA could wake up at their normal time, 1 p.m. and still see our show. But let us know, maybe 11, 12, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I don't know what the good time is. Certainly, all of these will be listed as videos on our website. This is our show number 1. And when, I'm sure in about 20 years, we'll come back and reminisce about starting this project. Of course, hopefully we'll be able to leave our homes before then, but I'm not entirely sure. So.
Yeah, and before we wrap, let's just do a kind of just a quick review of best practices we've talked about today. They kind of got all interspersed through things. One thing we didn't specifically address in our comms was making sure that there's an intercom pack with the streaming person backstage or wherever they happen to be if it's a smaller event. The importance of them hearing what's going on in the show, that they have an idea and we have a way of communicating with them directly. A lot of times they are going to be that second or third person listening to our feed, and they may not be able to, again, we know everybody has 2 jobs, theirs and audio's, and they'll be more than happy to tell us what's wrong. And that's a good thing in many ways. We need to embrace that they may not be able to describe it the same way we need, but that's an important thing. One other topic we didn't talk about, and this one could go on forever, and we'll touch base just a little bit on in the comms section next week, but the IT department, how important is IT to what we're doing with webcasting? They're everything, all right? They control the pipe. In most corporations now, especially I'm sure in Mac's situation at the facility there, the IT department is obviously intimately involved because that's the transport medium, but also because they manage these things. They're in a lot of, whether it's hotels, whether it's meeting facilities, IT is responsible for audio and video. And so we need to embrace that, and we need to build relationships. We also need to learn how to speak their language. One of the things we're working on is putting together an IT webinar that's going to focus, really has nothing to do with audio. It has everything to do with understanding how the zeros and ones are moved around, how octets, what does this mean, and how do we speak the language. These IT professionals have been thrust into audio support. They didn't study to get into audio. They thought they were getting into something that was going to make them a lot of money, and they could work a cool 9-to-5 gig. Come to find out, when this hits America, everybody's working from home and they're working 24 hours a day. So I do find a little solace in that. But the point is, they are a key part of our team. So embrace them and understand what their concerns are and what their needs are. And I learned on a few projects I was working on that they appreciate organization, and they appreciate being communicated to early and regularly. What they don't appreciate are surprises, right? That old sign that says, you know, lack of planning on your part does not constitute an emergency on my part. We have to respect that. And we while we don't have a lot of lead time right now, we can have our systems in place and we can understand what our needs are. Walking in from the beginning going, hey, is it possible to get a phone line? Is it possible? If not, can I have a VLAN for my wireless comms? Can I have a back channel somehow off of the main feed that you're using for the webcast outbound? In the early days of having the, I remember when high speed first came to our rooms, and we were able to, it's like, holy cow, this is awesome. I can go places and so fast I've never done before. I was on a show just a mere 6 years ago that somebody decided with this nice big pipe, we had a 100 meg pipe coming in, they decided to run BitTorrent. Well, I was immediately followed up with the IT manager going, someone is running BitTorrent. You need to tell them to stop it now. Don't ever go on it again, or we're pulling the line, right? Because they got it. They're like, look, the whole show's riding on this. This is not going to work. I've even had situations where I've been told, make sure your laptops have most current virus software. Don't tell me you're running a Mac and you don't get that, you know, any viruses, because that's not a valid argument. You do get malware and things like that. And they said, if for some reason we find that anybody on the crew that their machine had a virus and it causes damage to our internal network, we will hold you and the production company responsible for that. You know, now, can they? I don't know, but I'm sure not going to find out. I'm not going to try and challenge that system. So there's a lot of things that have nothing to do with audio that we have to be mindful of that we never had to before. I'm going to keep going down the list. Mac ident, right? We talked about that, the importance of identifying. We'll post some cool, there was a cool comment, somebody with an app of the metronome to use for lip sync, put it up to the camera, right? There's multiple things. We're going to post a lot of these questions on our website with the answers, because they're just neat solutions. Just not hard to do, just something you have to do. There you go. Oh man, I'm sorry, but you need to put some delay on that, please, Mac.
Okay.
You're out over here on my end. This is something, test remote, all remote sites every day, right? Why? Don't ever assume that, and thank you there, Pete. Pete is in sync, or should I say Pete's actually out of sync like he usually is, but that's okay. the importance of testing, both obviously would do that during our rehearsals, but every day when we come in, re-verifying, right? Something
We do that
changed overnight.
We have a setup day on Monday, and our meetings are usually on Tuesday. So Monday in the afternoon, we come in, we fax all of these idents. We don't test every site, but we test half a dozen sites. And then we come in 5 o'clock in the morning on Tuesday, and at 5:30 we start testing, and we're testing until probably 7 o'clock, at which point everybody gets a bio break because we go live at 7:30. But
right. So, but in a live
we did the
situation
day before, right? We do it again.
Mm-hmm. Great. Yeah, and I think that's important. Go ahead.
We're all in this business. We've done a million shows with a million different production companies, and strangely enough, we decided to do this webinar, and all of a sudden we're trying to figure out how to be the producer, how to be the TD, how to be the stuff that we don't normally do, the stage management stuff we don't normally do. And we try to keep reminding ourselves we do need a tech rehearsal, we do need a dress rehearsal. We went through all that. We tech yesterday, we dress rehearsed today, and we came down here. And we still think there are 1,000 things which we thought of along the way that we have to make better, and we're working on it. So please join us again on Monday. Our next show is at 4 p.m.
Yeah, and we'll be putting that registration link out on Facebook and LinkedIn after we hang up from this show. It's going to be a really interesting one with Ram and Jonathan from ClearCom. It's not going to be about we can't cover every topic, comms, that with that, but those of you who have heard Ram speak before, you will not be disappointed. It is really about you're gonna, I would say, come with your fire hat on and a really big cup, because it's gonna be drinking from a fire hose. My hope is that today you walk out with more questions than you walked in with. I consider that to be a success, because
and I want it's really great. We've still got 65 people out of the 95 we had on sign up for this, and on our website there will be a register link as well as a go-to meeting link, because a lot of people said, I lost the email, where do I go to? So we're going to add the go-to meeting link to the website as well. So if you forget where you put it, just go to the website and log on at the right time and you'll be there. If you could also please bring 10 friends next time.
Absolutely. I'd love nothing more than to have to upgrade the package for more people. Many of you we knew. There is a lot of you that I've never met. I'm super excited about that. Please let us know, good, bad, indifferent. We're not in this for the business of the money.
There's money.
So there's no money for you, Peter. No money for you, unless you're going to dye your hair back to the original color. But I would stick with what you have. We'd love to hear your comments, good, bad, indifferent. Mac, stay the way you are, buddy. We love you. At the end of the day, we'll share as many of these comments as we can, and keep in touch with us. We've got multitudes of ways of doing that. Help us figure out how to make this better. Topics that are of interest to you, share them. We want to get those back to the factory. I will tell you, we've been encouraging every factory that's going to be on with us to put people listening so that they can see the comments coming in, and to understand what we're trying to address within the marketplace currently. I will tell you, we're working on one with James Staffo on RF. I know a lot of people have questions and are always excited to hear from him. So keep an eye on our website for that. And Pete, Mac, do you have anything you'd like to add before we sign off?
Well, we're right now, we only have the 2 shows up on there, but we do have shows planned for every day next week, and this weekend we'll be posting them, and several shows after that. We've got a line of about 20 different people who have come out of the woods and say, wow, I'd love to do that, love to do that, love to do that. And in the beginning, we were thinking, well, we would just start traveling around the country and produce shows in different companies. You know, LMG was extremely generous to us, said, come on down to Orlando. We'll provide you a whole video crew and lighting and everything. Well, the reality is somebody came and locked my front door to my apartment and I can't get out. So we're all going to just stay where we are, and how you say the dreaded words, shelter in place, when we do this. So now we're going to have just one big party on the web.
Right. And, you know, pick up conversations wherever they are. I would encourage you, start your own conference calls with your friends in the business. I was talking with someone yesterday who was like, well, you know what? The nice thing about being on these calls, it feels like I'm working. Obviously, it's not billable, but at least I feel like I'm working. I've probably done more work in the last 6 days than I have in the last week, but it's awesome. And keep in touch with your friends. Keep in touch with the people that are your road family, and encourage them. This is going to come to an end. It's going to get better. But let's enjoy the time that we have, whether it's with our friends or whether it's our family, with those dreaded words, shelter in place.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Where we have the opportunity to slow down and take in life in a way that we haven't since the internet emerged on us, however many years ago that was. And I would just encourage you, stay in touch with people, keep them upbeat, keep them focused on the fact that when we come out of this, it's gonna be fast, folks. I think, you know, we'll be seeing a lot of those exponential curves, and I'm excited about that. And I'm going to stay positive. I hope you guys will stay positive, and we'll look for everybody to join us next week. And up until then, have a great weekend, and we'll see hopefully a lot of you back here on Monday afternoon.
And please send comments to Kelly at practicalshow.tech. Kelly at practicalshow.tech.
And there you go, practicalshow.tech. Kelly at practicalshow.tech. So long, folks. Have a good weekend.
Thank you, everybody.